The following content may be difficult for some. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Inspiration with E hosts. This is Ericka Arthur, and I'm so glad that you are here to join us tonight. Suicide is a very difficult topic to tackle, a very difficult topic to talk about. And behind every story, there is a family. Tonight, we're going to be interacting with people from all walks of life. This is a safe, non-judgment zone. Because it's such a tough topic, though, if you need a moment to step away, that is okay. If you need a moment to yourself, if you need to log off, it's okay. This is a particular segment that deals with suicide and mental illness within communities of color and communities of faith. It's important to me that we set the atmosphere for peace, and that we set the atmosphere for blessings and for comfort. So if you would just allow me a moment to do that. Father, in the name of Jesus, I say thank you. Thank you so much for blessing us with this opportunity to connect. We all are here for different reasons, but I pray that for whatever the reason is, that you would bless every single person that's here in attendance. Bless every family that is represented, every organization, every business venture, every care and concern. If it is important to us, it is important to you. I ask, Father, that you touch this segment tonight, and that you honor everyone's efforts for coming on and sharing their time and lending their time. I ask that you would comfort us all. We pray for a supernatural portion of peace, Father, and that you would be glorified. Meet every need and every unspoken request. And I do pray blessings on everything from the technical aspect to all of it, Father. Would you accept my offering? I humbly give it to you by faith. Amen. So we're going to get started tonight. I'm going to give you a moment for you all just to introduce yourselves. I am going to keep the setting like this. I hope you're okay with that, so we can all interact a bit. Kitt, let me just have you go ahead and introduce yourself to everyone.
Okay, I'm someone who I'm actually a former psychotherapist and a former seminarian. So I actually did feel the call. You know, I went to seminary. And I'm someone who lives with bipolar disorder. And when I was in seminary, it became clearer and clearer that God was calling me to a mental health ministry. And though I don't actually even go to church now, which I'm being called back to, because I'm starting next week. I'm going to be doing a Christmas chorale, and so getting into singing those songs and being in a church singing those songs is bringing me back. So I'm thankful for that.
Awesome.
So my experience with suicide started when I was 18-year-old, and I became suicidal, and got to the point where I had, they have ways of assessing it, and I had not only the thoughts, but I had the means, and I had a suicide note, and I had a plan, all the pieces that make it very high risk that I was actually going to do it. And all of a sudden I kind of stepped outside of myself, and I looked at what I was doing, and I said, oh no, I'm actually going to do it this time. I'm not just thinking it. And I called a friend and asked her to come over and just be with me, because I wasn't safe. And I went over to my resident assistant in the dormitory, and I asked for her to get me in to see a psychotherapist that day. That it was a crisis, which she did, and that saved my life. The fact that I asked for help and got that help saved me. And my friend is still a dear friend. I just saw her recently. That friend who was there, who I consider life-saving, She's still a dear friend, and I'm thankful for her.
Well, we're so glad that you're here on a million different levels. So we're going to be talking a little bit more. Right now, we're just making our round of introductions. We're going to move to Greg Roberts. Kind sir.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Greg Roberts, licensed psychotherapist and school psychologist. I'm originally from the Philadelphia area, but currently residing and practicing in the DMV. Prior to my career change into the world of mental health and psychology, I was a full-time music industry head, I guess, so to speak. I was a full-time radio program director. I did background vocals for a lot of different popular gospel artists in the industry. And I also served as minister of music for a couple of very large churches. And so I guess my introduction to the world of mental health, I think, as I'm remembering it now, was probably through my church ministry experience. And noticing, by being on a staff of a very prominent church, noticing when mental health issues would arise in these congregations, and people would identify the issue, but not have any resources to address the issue. And so that kind of led to, when it was time for me to make a career choice and change, it kind of led me in that direction of where my ministry could go from out in front to a more personal one-to-one type of experience.
Appreciate you sharing that. Tamu Lewis, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ericka. So my name is Tamu Lewis. I am the founder and board president of the Lee Thompson Young Foundation. It was named after my brother, actor Lee Thompson Young, who we lost to suicide in 2013. So my mom and I started the foundation the following year to really promote mental health education. And this is a calling that I answered. By day, I am an HR leader, so I can relate to you, Ericka. So this is something, right, that I do because I'm passionate about it, and frankly, I don't want other family members to have to go through what me and my family went through after losing my brother to suicide. He was diagnosed with a mental illness of bipolar disorder. And at the time he chose to keep it to himself. So no one knew. So people weren't given the opportunity to support him in LA where he was working. And I'm also raising a daughter. My oldest daughter is diagnosed with bipolar disorder as well.
I appreciate you sharing. I am going to bring back on camera DiShan Washington.
It is so wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for having me this evening. Hello, everyone. You can just call me DiShan. You don't have to say pastor.
Yes,
that comes with a lot of connotations, but I am a third generation pastor, and I've known Ericka for a minute now. And my passion for this topic came from my own experiences. I'm sure we'll get into that in greater detail in a little bit, but I'm very passionate because I grew up in church, and I grew up in religious organizations where this topic was not discussed. It was and is a taboo topic. And I just decided one day that I was going to champion it because I could not shake depression. I could not shake all of the ideations. And so after my first couple of attempts, I knew that I needed to do something. I needed to open my mouth. I needed to be a voice because there are so many people especially in the Christian faith, who suffer in silence. And I wanted to be a voice for those individuals who felt ashamed, who felt as though they did not love God, if they were depressed or they were not, quote unquote, saved enough. And I'm just a rebel. I'm that rebel. I always tackle the difficult subjects. And so as a result of that, a few years ago, I started Hold On, because it was a hug that saved my life. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a scripture. It was a hug. And so I wanted to spread the message of how important it is for us to touch people and to meet them on the level that they are on. And sometimes that means just simply giving a hug. And so we are still trekking forward with Hold On. And I'm just honored to be here tonight among the conversation.
Thank you so much for that. You all, I feel myself getting a little teary-eyed. I'm just so grateful. My heart is so full. I want to start with Kitt. Kitt, you and I met in 2015, where we found out how therapeutic writing could be. But we know that when it comes to the subject of suicide and mental illness, what is it that gave you the courage to share your story, where you felt like it couldn't even be internalized, like it had to be shared?
Right. Well, it's interesting because I had this very long history with mental illness and, psychotherapy and medication. But then there was a triggering event, and that event was that my father-in-law had a near-death experience. And I became hypomanic and just found, I was medicated, I was in therapy. I was doing all those things I had to do, but still I just had these thoughts and feelings that had to get out. And so I turned to writing, and I posted the writing publicly. Now I'm somebody who sort of visualizes things like I had always seen myself as an orator and in this sort of I didn't know it was going to be on the internet, but doing these sort of talking back and forth with people, and public speaking and orating, and I also had always seen myself as having a website. As soon as that became a thing, I saw my name, and I thought that I'd be sharing my writing on it. So it happened then in 2013, I think I started. And I started writing about the thoughts that were pressing in my mind just to get them out. And it helped me organize my thoughts because I'm a very terse writer. So the thoughts are going fast in my head, and I might talk with the real fast, speed with that sort of manic or hypomanic pressure. But because of the way I write, I edit and re-edit and re-edit and re-edit. So it enabled me to sort of therapeutically cope with those thoughts. Just the act of writing and rewriting disciplined those thoughts, slowed those thoughts, and got me to cope with them. And so I'm a huge believer, and because we connected on the blogging community, I was very active back then. It's changed over the years because I've had to kind of pull back.
Same. The list goes on and on, Kitt.
Right. But back then I was very active in connecting with other bloggers, and there's a very strong mental health blogging community that's very mutually supportive and is also supportive of people getting help. Where I might write something and I might have a comment back then that would say, Kitt, please go to your mental health team. You're showing symptoms of this, that, or the other thing in your writing. So that community was extremely supportive.
I have a question for you, Kitt. I have someone who I admire. Her name is Crystal Perry. She's an entrepreneur and a visionary. I call her All the Woman. That's my nickname for her. One of the things that Crystal challenged me back in 2017 was that it's okay to stop and begin again. You don't have to necessarily stay in those spaces that no longer serve you. If there's something different that you want to do, that's okay. To redefine yourself in midair. But when you introduced yourself, you shared such incredible things that someone would go, oh yeah, that's your career for life. What happens when life interrupts you and you have to make a decision? How does that affect your mental health? And where's the stigma attached to that moment where you have to say, you know what, this is not working anymore, and that's okay?
that's huge. And in
Mhm.
fact, my biggest, I've had to do that several times in my life, and it was very hard because I was raised from the time I was 5, being
Mhm.
introduced to people as this Kitt, she's going to go to Harvard and
Mhm.
become a doctor. She's going to
Mhm.
go to Harvard Medical School. So I had these expectations that were really, really, really high. And I'm smart. I did very well in school, but that doesn't mean that I was able to do that.
Yeah.
And so I've had to reassess at different times in my life when I had these transition points.
Mhm.
And the biggest reassessment, I'm going to jump forward to that 18-year-old, suicidality, to when I was 39, even though I had shown symptoms of bipolar disorder, I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar disorder or treated for it, even though I saw, doctors and psychiatrists and
Right.
therapists. And so, but at 39, I got my diagnosis changed to bipolar disorder,
Mhm.
and my internalized stigma and what I had to change then. I was a stay-at-home mom at that point of a toddler, and my internalized stigma was I can no longer be a good mother because I have a progressive mental illness that's very serious.
Mhm.
So I put my son in daycare and went to work. And I ended up, because I get triggered working, I overwork, I work crazy hours.
Mhm.
I ended up hospitalized
Mhm.
and for 2 weeks and partially hospitalized for months. And then I had to reassess again.
Yeah.
And what I reframed that whole experience of, because I ended up going on disability, was that God made me, he struck me down basically. It's
Mhm.
almost like Joseph, like, wrestling with the angel, kind of put that little thing in my hip, struck me down, made me stay home. Not that I was having an experience with God, but I do believe that God was very much a part of it, that I had to stay home. And he made me stay home with this disability, because it turns out that my son needed me. My son was had a lot of issues: ADHD, depression, anxiety, social anxiety, migraines, horrible migraines. So he needed me, and I didn't realize. I thought I was the worst thing for him, and it turned out I was the best thing for him. But it took a lifetime to figure 20 years to figure that out.
In all fairness, and I know what you're referring to it with Jacob wrestling with an angel all night, wrestling all night
Oh,
with the Lord.
Jacob, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, JJ.
It's just my mind does.
Listen, I already told you, I don't have the energy to rock more than one face. This is it. I get it, but I do understand exactly what you're talking about. I have a question though, before we move to the next panelist, and I'll get everyone back on screen. You mentioned parenting, and we have this, especially when it comes to moms, and I can only speak, of course, through that lens, where we have this pressure to just get it right. Mommy has all the answers. Um, but what does that look like when you yourself are battling, um, through bipolar disorder and trying to also parent and empower your child while you yourself as an adult are figuring things out?
Right. I think the number one thing for me, well, the number one thing was to take care of yourself.
Mhm.
You definitely have to take care of yourself. That means that if you have a serious mental illness like I do, you have to take your medicine, you have to go to therapy, you have to make sure you're taking care of your own mental and physical health. Now, second, and I already lost the thing that I was going to say.
You're okay. We're fine. This is a no judgment zone. So
Anyway, there was another thing that was
fine.
really good.
It's okay. It'll come back to you. It's okay. You know what? We can put a pin in it right there. I can move right on. Is that's okay with you? All right. Glad you're here. Oh, is
I
that
just,
your? It came back to you? Wait, I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
I just remembered,
Okay.
and it's a spiritual thing, and it's a Jesus thing for me.
Okay.
I always loved, I was a perfectionist when I was younger, you know, and with these high expectations.
Mhm.
And the thing I always loved about Jesus is that Jesus is the one and only human who was God, right? So he's the only perfect human.
Right.
None of, we all want to be, you know, to do right,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
we all will fail because we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. So
Definitely.
so I was raised by a mother who never apologized for ever hurting me when she did hurt me.
Mm.
And so for me, I think that acknowledging that I was imperfect, teaching my son how important it was to accept yourself as being imperfect and apologizing when I made mistakes
Huge as a
is
parent.
huge.
Huge as a parent. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Because that, you know, there's a saying that what you do in moderation, your children do in excess. So I think that that is a connection when you're dealing with, you want your children to apologize for something that they did, but then at the same time, they're learning from you, well, I don't have to, you don't. All connected, all connected. I'm going to move from Kitt, and Kitt, thank you for that. We're going to get now on here. I want to bring Tamu on. Hello, beautiful.
Hello, Ericka.
I'm so glad that you're here. I hate that we are connecting under these circumstances. You made mention that your brother was living in California, but he was a very, very well-known actor. Tell us a little bit about him.
So he was gifted from the beginning. So as a young child, he determined or decided that he was going to be an actor. I think he was around the age of 10, and he told my mom that he needed some business cards. And she's like, well, what would the business cards say? And he said, they will say Lee Thompson Young, actor. So, you know, he was gifted. Even younger than that, he would go to the library and volunteer to read stories to the children, but he was a child.
Wow.
Right. So he was always this light and gift to us as his family and to the world, really. And began to have some signs of something. We didn't know what that was at the time, but around the age of 19 was this first sort of episode that, but he wasn't diagnosed at the time. And it seemed like really fast and like maybe there was some sort of like imbalance. So it wasn't until sometime in the 20s where there was an episode where we actually had to go to, you know, a psychiatrist and got a diagnosis. And he would take medication. But as I mentioned, he decided to keep the diagnosis to himself. So he knew, I knew, my mom knew, and that was it. And my mom and I live on the East Coast. He was in LA working. The thing that is still amazing to me, which I think can provide us a source of hope, even though his life ended tragically, is all the things that he was able to accomplish. So he starred in the famous Jet Jackson. I think he was 16, maybe. Several movies, other TV shows, but a lot of people don't know that he was a National Merit Scholar and he graduated with honors from the University of Southern California in the film school.
I did not know that either.
Right. So all this time he's managing mental health and not having community support because he chose to keep it silent. And of course, now it's 2022, right? And we're having conversations about it, but there's still a lot of stigma. There's still a lot of shame. So we're talking about way before that, right? 2013 and before, when he's dealing with this. And I didn't really become educated around mental health and mental illness until after he passed. So even though I was aware of the diagnosis, he was just so excellent in all areas of his life. It was like, you know, I would go and be supportive. I would talk to the doctor and stay with him. Now, mind you, I'm married with 2 children and a career, right? But I would go sometimes for 7-10 days if he was feeling imbalanced. And again, he was under doctor's care. So it wasn't like, I guess I felt like he was safe. So once, you know, he would be back in balance and I would be in conversation with the doctor, and my mom and I would oftentimes like alternate who would go to LA, then we would leave and like everything would be fine again, or so we thought, right? So I think, you know, it's very important to continue discussions like these, and particularly in communities of color and in faith communities, because I do often hear people talking about, you know, you can just pray about it. And I guess my opinion is that, you know, God made the doctors too. Like they, you know, they're there to help it. And the other thing is that this is a medical condition. Just because it is of the brain doesn't mean it's something that you can just will away. So I, you know, it irritates me when I hear people kind of simplify things, and particularly with raising my daughter as well. So fortunately, she is able to discuss her diagnosis and didn't have a problem, you know, with us letting family know, and, you know, her teachers and all of that, so she could be supported. So I think, you know, that's positive, but it is still it's a struggle. It's a journey too. So I feel like sometimes because we have the foundation and I speak about it and I write about it, it doesn't mean that it's like any easier for me and my family.
That's a good point. And I'm glad you made mention of that, because I want you to kind of touch on, before we move on to Greg, I want you to touch on just that moment of when people lose someone, but it's a high profile event, with him being a high visibility actor, still your little brother though.
Right.
And so I want you to kind of touch on what that space is like and what people can do to be a little bit more considerate when those moments, you know, God forbid, happen.
Right. I will tell you that question makes me remember the day when we got the call. I was still very much in shock, and we were still kind of notifying family members. And somehow TMZ called my personal cell phone. I mean, we're talking about, you know, the same day. So some hours later after I was notified. So I just was like, wow, you know, wow, really? I think it is understandable that the public wants to know what happened, and was there a note, or did we have any signs, or why didn't we know, all of that. And it really, it adds to the grieving process, because obviously if there was something that you could have done, you would have. So I think maybe just to have some grace and know that people do the best they have with the best they can with the information they have. Assume that and not the worst.
I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to Greg. Greg had made mention about him being involved in ministry but also being someone who is in the professional arena as it relates to mental health. And we're going to be talking about a few different things. But Greg, I want you to touch on, and again, we're dealing with it takes a village. I really want you to touch on the whole African-American male and youth, of course, with these numbers rising. But this stigma of men talking, please touch on that.
So things seem to be getting a little bit better in recent years. There seem to be, from a social media presence perspective, a lot of men that are licensed therapists or life coaches that are doing more services now that are catered to and designed specifically for men and men's issues. I think that those are starting to slowly become more and more effective, and more men are starting to open up to them. However, there is, I don't know, there's like a machismo factor that goes into men putting their hearts on the table, and exposing like the deepest parts of who they are, and the deepest parts are where this issue that we're talking about lives, right?
Yeah.
A lot of men, our interactions tend to be rather superficial. We can talk about sports, we can talk about, what's going on, but, very surface level social type of things.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to like sharing traumas that are going on within your household or in your family, very few men, I think, have a safe space where they feel that they can put that.
Why is that?
I think for a number of reasons. For married men, I think that there is the strength factor of, as the man of a household, I need to represent strength. How can my wife depend on me, lean on me, and trust in me if I'm falling to pieces? So I will do what I need to do to make sure that everybody else is good. Yeah, some men are also nervous about revealing those vulnerable parts to their wives, in a fear that the level of confidence that they have in them may be decreased as a result.
It's interesting, but a lot of people say that there are these issues, Greg, that they start from childhood. And I know that you've worked with a myriad, or a range, I should say, of age groups. But do you see that connection where this is something that could have been dealt with or it wasn't diagnosed? In our community too, just the knowledge of, and I apologize, I didn't interrupt you, but I automatically thought about that. What goes on here stays here.
Yeah.
What goes on in this house stays in this house. And how that translates the older we get, what does that even look like? What's the connection there?
So to me, the connection there is a parents, where that whole what goes on in this house stays in this house thing comes from, to me, is a parent's desire to keep their own vulnerabilities secure, not just to the outside world, but to their children. And so I think that that's a big piece of where mental health can kind of slip in where it doesn't need to, because like growing up traditionally, like we did, I don't know about you, but I don't feel like I knew a whole lot about my parents, my mother and father, the man and the woman. I knew about them as mom and dad.
Sure.
And that's it. And so I think that when you are able to reveal a little bit more of yourself within reason, to your children, they begin to then see the humanity in you, and not just this, because children, I think, are programmed to see their parents as like the perfect example of whatever.
My hero, the strongest.
Right.
No.
Right. And so as they get, all that is fine in the younger stages.
Yeah.
Once you start crossing over into adolescence, and they start to see some of the things that you have laid out for them and the faultiness in some of those concepts, what they want to lean on is, what can I lean on in my parent that I see that's that real part?
Okay, attaching yourself to the humanity. It's interesting because it kind of connects to what what Kitt was making mention of, as a mom dealing with bipolar disorder.
Right.
And after a while, you know, your children, you can hide but so much, especially if you're raising them to be emotionally intelligent.
I would see. All right, I was going to bring up the whole. I have that one of my notes is emotional intelligence. I mean, because that's a thing. Honestly, I don't want to transition, but when I was thinking about emotional intelligence, I was thinking about it from an African American community perspective, more so lower income, low SES segments of the population, because that's a lot of the population that I serve on a regular basis. But trauma becomes normalized in the adult range. And so when you have all of these things that are driven by socioeconomics, and the parents are trying to manage all that in areas that are ridden with violence, and it's the way to deal with problems is to be confrontational.
Yeah.
Like, that is hard to develop emotional intelligence in children when the adults are still wrestling with that piece themselves, just from a parental and just even how they show up and how they represent their children in the school environment. That's that type of thing. So, you know, it's a lot of hand-me-downs, so to speak, that we get, whatever it is that I've dealt with as a parent. Most of these times when I'm seeing cycles of trauma that are generational, and a whole lot of not talking about things that everybody sees. And so as you look at the stories and they unravel, the story literally repeats itself over and over again, mainly because of things that we as adults try to hold secret to maintain our own standing.
I'm gonna get away from that, because is that a Hammond B3? Put me in B flat. We really could stay right there.
Put you right in there. Put you in A flat.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, that's good. I'm gonna coming back to you, sir.
Okay.
Oh, this is so good. This is so good. Okay, DiShan, I'm getting ready to bring you on, and then I'll have everyone join shortly. But DiShan's story is unique in that she was also pastoring young, co-pastoring at a time, and dealing with not only suicide ideation and attempt, and what that looked like in the whole, this is church, this is how I show up. How are you? I'm doing wonderful. Everything is wonderful. And then inside, it's like, no, actually, it's not wonderful. And you're
That's
smiling.
highly favored.
Come on. You're
Power
smiling,
right.
but hurting. Please, let's get into it.
Okay, so I think it's worth noting that I got married at the age of 16 years old. I was a child bride. That's what we call it nowadays. It wasn't, I would say it wasn't as abnormal in Alabama where I grew up. But of course, now in 2022, that would be probably a viral story. But anyway, I got married at 16 to a young and upcoming minister who very shortly after our marriage became a pastor. And being that I was a third generation first lady, I still know nothing can prepare you, for what that role really is until you actually step into it, right? And so I dealt with a lot of disrespect. I lost my, budding identity. I mean, I was still young, even though I was very mature for my age. There were just a lot of things that happened where, people at 16 years old should not be dealing with. The stress that comes with pastoring and being married to a pastor. And then we went from there, we transitioned to planning our own church that was really successful really quickly. We grew from 17 people in our living room to a couple thousand people. And next thing you know, we're traveling all over the country. People know our names, and we have a lot to handle, a lot to juggle. And so with that success came infidelity in my marriage. Long story short, I was not able to mentally handle that. I was already dealing with so much stress that came with the title and with the position. And so then when the infidelity was added to that, I started internalizing it as if, I'm not enough. People already don't respect me because of my age and just so many different things. I also, I dropped out of high school to get married. It wasn't because, I was, making bad grades. I was actually very smart, probably too smart. And nobody could understand, why would you do that? You have a bright future ahead of you. And you say, God told you to get married. Mm-hmm. You're going to drop out of high school. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going on the, I'm going to go on the road and I'm going to serve God. And I'm going to just give him the, the best years of my life. And I was so excited when it happened. But then very shortly after that, the landscape of my life changed. And so you're right. It became, as you said, I'm good. I'm happy. People were looking on the outside eventually, and saw the success. They saw the cars, they saw the designer bags, the shoes, the clothes, all of the glamour that we see that comes along with, quote unquote, church and mega church. Right. I lived that life. I was driving a Bentley at 24 years old. And so I used to go to the Walgreens down the street though and cry in that Bentley, because I had nobody to talk to and no one understood my plight because, there again, I'm third generation. I watched my mother do this. I watched my grandmother do this. And it goes back to what you just said. Everything that happens in the house stays in the house. Stays in the house. So I didn't want to talk to my mom or my grandmother about what was going on. And we were taught and trained not to talk to laypersons. We don't talk to people in the congregation about what's going on behind the scenes. And so we put this facade on, we put this front up, and we go out there and we turn ourselves on for the public. Mm-hmm. And then we go home and we are a private failure. And so it's like you're publicly successful, but you are privately failing. And that was really the epitome of my life. And it just became so much, Ericka, whereas one day I just said, I can't do this anymore. I don't care if I go to hell because that's what they tell you. Mm-hmm. People, do that. They go, I just didn't care anymore. I didn't care about the cars. I just wanted peace. And from my position and all of the expectations that were surrounding that position, I wanted to check out. And so that is where, that particular struggle and my awareness of my mental health came into play when the infidelity creeped in and I couldn't handle it. It was just one thing too many. And so it was a lot.
I want you to talk, DiShan, about that stigma attached to when you were no longer able to mm-hmm. hold on. Mm-hmm. And where did you find your comfort? Because a lot of times it doesn't come within the four walls. But then there are times when there are maladaptive coping mechanisms that we use while mm-hmm. still showing up on Sunday. So this way we can convince people that we are doing well when we're not.
Right. So after my first attempt, I was still married at that time. Mm-hmm. My now ex-husband came in and caught me, basically, and he had me admitted to a psychiatric ward. I walked in and the lady, and I know she wasn't supposed to do this, but she said to me, "Hey, I know you. You're the pastor's wife," and it was so embarrassing. I don't know why that still triggers me to this day, and it's been a while ago.
Because it should. It should trigger you. That's crazy.
2007, and she said, "You're the pastor's wife," and I looked at her and I said, "Listen, I don't know if you are about to start quoting scriptures to me, but I promise you, whatever you're about to say, I already know, and I could probably quote it backwards. That's how much I know the word." And so she caught my tone and she just let it go. It was so embarrassing. To answer your question, it was really embarrassing when I got back to church following having been in there. I got up and I told my own story because I didn't want it to get out. And I wanted to, I'm a proponent of saying, I'll tell it so that you know what really happened versus somebody else, spinning it and adding to it, so on and so forth. So I got up and I told the congregation myself. And of course it was embarrassing, but I gained a lot of respect. And what I realized from that point is that there were so many people who were hurting in the congregation who was every Sunday shouting over their pain. They
Come
were
on, DiShan.
over their hurts. They were, speaking in tongues over
Come
their
on.
and at that moment, something was birthed in me. Now, don't get me wrong, Ericka, I would be lying if I said that was the end of my struggle, but that was the beginning of my freedom. That was the beginning of me being able to say, I have an issue. My mind is sick. And just the way you go to a cardiologist when your heart isn't right, or you go to an optometrist when you can't see correctly, it's nothing wrong with going to talk to somebody. And that's what I did. I went and I got counseling, and I started to see life from a different perspective. And so it was that moment where, like I said, where I was just like, I don't care what people say. You can talk about me, you can write about me. And at that particular, I've been going viral for a long time, Ericka. And so somebody wrote a blog. Back then, blogs were just coming out, and somebody wrote a blog about how this, mega pastor's wife in Atlanta at the time, admitted to trying to take her life. And I welcomed the conversation. But going just to fast forward to 2014, when I had a business deal go bad, and I tried to, I attempted, and I called a friend over. My parents had come over, my sister, everybody was fussing. Everybody was trying to remind me of my kids. Everybody was trying to tell me everything I had to live for. And people don't understand, when you're in that frame of mind, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking, I don't have options, and my only option is to go this route. You're thinking that your children will be better off without you. That's the real to it. That's what's going through your mind. And so anyway, I called the friend over, and he said, step outside for me. And I was like, okay. He wanted to pull me away from my parents and my family, who was fussing at me and just like, how could you do this again? And he just embraced me. And something broke within me. I just started crying. And I think years worth of just tears that I had not shed came out just while he was holding me. And that's where Hold On actually came from, because he was literally holding on to me. And I realized the power of a hug, and how I needed, what I needed was not tough love. I actually needed soft love. Yeah, so.
Oh, goodness gracious. I'm getting ready. Hold on one second, Greg. I'm getting ready to bring you guys back on. Greg, don't lose your train of thought. I have to say this. DiShan, one of the things that you said just now, as it relates to the hug that you were given, I need you to address how important it is for people who are in authority to operate from a pure space, because you can discern if a hug is coming from a pure space. You can discern if a hug is coming from a manipulative space, and why that is so important for all of those who serve in leadership to be able to, when they're holding you, even when they're holding you, what is it that you are imparting in that hug, and why you were able to tell the difference?
Exactly. Being in leadership, of course, I've hugged so many people, hundreds of people throughout my lifetime. And that moment helped me to understand the power in it, the power that you have to be able to influence someone's decision. That they could be at the end of their rope. They could literally be struggling to hold on. And that hug, when coming from a pure place, could be saves their life. Unfortunately, Ericka, we all of us who are listening that are familiar with the faith community, especially the African American community, we all know that there has been some manipulation that has happened in ministry. And not just physical, but spiritual manipulation, where you take advantage of someone who is struggling, someone who is in a low place. And so I think that if more pastors and people in leadership would have these type of conversations,
that's right,
and not shy away from it, and stop thinking, we are above this, or, we don't struggle with this, because it doesn't matter what your title is.
That's right.
How long you've had a relationship with God. It doesn't matter, because your mind can be sick, and you could have just come out of prayer. So I think that leaders should really get involved with these type of conversations so that they can understand that if they are really in it for the saving of souls, and I'm not talking about the salvation aspect of it.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the saving of your soul, which is your mind, your will, and your emotions.
That's
I'm
right.
talking about if we're really in it for what we say we are in it for, then we would be more careful to make sure that those who have been trusted to us in terms of the sheep or the flock, that we would not manipulate that or take advantage, because there are so many people I believe that we've lost that we could have saved had they had a safe space to be able to trust somebody that they looked up to.
Thank you so much for touching on that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kitt. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Tamu, for having this conversation. We are not done yet, but I just want to say thank you, because it's very courageous for you all to show up in these spaces. And this is why I'm having this conversation, because we're walking around looking the part and lacking the power. I'm going to say it again. We're walking around looking the part and lacking the power because the inside is so broken. And we cannot handle the weight of the calling because we're so busy trying to convince you that we're okay when we're not. And so this is why it's important to have these conversations. Greg, I'm gonna be quiet. Greg, go ahead, take it, and then we're gonna rotate.
Oh, no, I was just good. When she had, DiShan had said something about the tough love, and the thought just came to my mind, like, that is our cultural way. You know, that's it. We come from a culture of suck it up. You know, or give, or in a spiritual translation, give it to God. You know, and I think, just to touch on something else that she said, with in terms of, I think a lot of, and I think I said this to you in a previous conversation, Ericka, that a lot of spiritual leadership are reluctant to explore the topic, because when you're dealing with these structures of manipulation and power, there is a sense of, I need to be the authority on every topic that happens underneath of my roof. And when you start talking about mental health and things that require state licensure to actually say I'm an expert on, a lot of pastors don't want to relinquish. They see that as a relinquishment of power in some cases, because, all right, now I'm giving my flock over to you, to this whole nother set of ideals that may or may not align with what I've been preaching and teaching all along. And so I think that some of that is, some of the fear from leadership comes from that. On the other hand, when I started my career, or this new part of my career, I noticed that there were some churches that were taking a proactive stance, not just by embracing the whole concept of mental health under the roof, but actually going as far as to seed into business operations for like third-party billing counseling centers that were actually connected to their ministries. So that you may go in and see the pastor, or you may see a pastoral assistant for a particular, or pastoral counselor for a certain amount of time. But if then the issue is something that's greater, you can get referred to this third-party billing thing. And so that's something that some churches were starting to embrace.
That is a good thing.
So you see some forward movement.
No, that's a good thing. And that's a, we can touch on that in terms of why we have to use wisdom. Even when people are referred to me, I'm very upfront with what I can and cannot do. And I think it's important to be honest about what you're really literally capable of. Give that disclaimer from the top so that people know what they're working with. Kitt, talk to me about the moving into the organization. Is it NAMI? Is that how you, when you do the acronym?
That's how I say NAMI, but some people say NAMI. It's probably NAMI, but I say NAMI.
Okay,
it's the National Alliance, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they actually have a thing called FaithNet, NAMI.
That's
FaithNet.
what I wanted to talk about. Please, can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, they do just what Greg was talking about. I mean, they, you know what I mean? They promote mental health ministries, like a connection between faith communities and mental health communities, so that, you know, some is just so that they have, like, you know, people coming in maybe and connecting and or educating people, or having, you know, like groups or something there, or just letting the ministers know what resources are out there for their you know, their congregation. And it's a powerful thing. And actually, when I was in seminary, that's what I wrote, was like a curriculum for a mental health ministry. And, you know, so, you know, going from everywhere can go from just referrals, because that's where a lot of people, that's their first point, right, of
Yes.
contact is with their pastor. If they're in crisis, they go to their pastor or priest, and then that pastor and priest is the one who has to discern what's this person's need. And usually yes, you need spiritual support,
Yeah.
but you also need mental health support.
Yeah.
So it's just like if somebody came with you and they're in a crisis for any other health crisis, right? We pray for them, right? And they get spiritual support, but you don't tell them, don't go, oh, you're having a heart attack, don't go to the emergency room, right? You do both.
Right. I'm glad you talked about that. You know, I serve under the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I'm one of the board members and volunteers for the Greater Philadelphia chapter. And so in our presentation, Talk Saves Lives, it's an introduction to suicide prevention. That's one of the things that we talk about in terms of warning signs and risk factors, and how just something as simple as people understanding that there is a difference between mental health and mental illness. And I think when people hear mental health, they automatically connect that to mental illness. And so something as simple as that, you know, taking the time to teach people, to help them understand the language and why, just like what Kitt said, you know, if you have a heart issue, if you're dealing with symptoms of a stroke, you know, physical health, you want to go to a specialist in that area. As it relates to those of us in the faith community, because I'm also a licensed minister. And so with those of us in the faith community, when it comes to ministry, how I see it as a person who strongly believes in prayer is that those moments of prayer are to give revelation to the root of the issue. So this way we can get an accurate diagnosis and not put a Band-Aid on things that need open heart surgery. My God, today. Yeah, because then that's where we mess up. I do believe that there are doors that we have opened at times. I do believe that there are triggers that come from childhood abuse and I believe in all of that. I do believe that there's spiritual things as it relates to warfare. But I also think that sometimes we over spiritualize the mundane. Have you been resting well at night? Were you able to get something to eat? Do you have hot water, cold water in the house? Oh, okay. Your electricity's off. Not able to wash your clothes. The basics. And if we deal with the basics, that will help with a lot of suicidal ideation as well.
Maslow's all the way.
The basics. Tamu, please jump in. We can pick up on the family lens of it as well. We don't have to stay in the spiritual space because I want to cover all. And as you all can see, we're going to get ready to take some questions from the chat. I told you the time goes by very fast, but just give me like 2 to 3 minutes. I do definitely want your input, please.
So I think from a family perspective and a parenting perspective, I will just touch on that. A key word that is like really on my mind lately is patience. And I talked about this at the summit yesterday, but just on my own journey of grieving my brother, you know, losing my brother, and then parenting my oldest daughter, just realizing that it is a journey and it can be a lot of trial and error. And I think that may be where we lose some people, you know, who are seeking help, or maybe they go to a couple of sessions, or maybe they try a medication and then there's some side effects that they don't like. And then that's it, versus, well, you can let the psychiatrist, the counselor, let them know how you're feeling and what it is that you don't like. I think as a parent, I remember feeling shame and embarrassed when I would go to the psychiatrist with my daughter, thinking, should I really say everything that happened?
Right.
You know, should I really say that? And like literally sitting there, sort of like trying to like change the language so it wasn't quite as bad as what we had experienced. And then at some point I realized that that was impacting the psychiatrist's ability to help us. Right?
That's real.
Because when it's a child, all they have to go on is what you say as a parent. And then when they have that one-on-one time with the child, what they say, because they're not in the house. So if you don't actually tell them everything that happened, I mean, you could potentially have a misdiagnosis, you know, the wrong medication, the wrong treatment plan, the wrong behavioral skills, that, you know, cognitive skills that they're trying to teach. So I think that was really a key thing that I learned along the way. And another thing too, for anybody who's parenting or a loved one, caregiver that's listening, I began to keep notes in my phone, because the other thing was too, you're not actually talking to the psychiatrist or the counselor every day, typically. So when you go in for that visit to touch base, for that check-in to see if any adjustments need to be made, you might not actually remember everything that's happened since the last visit. And it can sometimes show them a trend too, if you have notes. So I would keep, you know, I have an iPhone, I would just whip out my phone and take notes in the notes app on there, and I put the date, and then I could say, you know, everything that occurred. And I found that really helpful. So that's a, you know, just a tip that I wish I had known in the beginning.
Thank you for sharing that. I wouldn't have even thought about that, but it makes perfect sense. Sort of like when you go to a physical checkup, if there's an emergency during triage, the first thing they want is a list of medications. What are you taking? What are you eating? So they can see if there's anything that is affecting the person in that way. Thank you for sharing that. I hope that that's helpful. I'm going to move to the chat. I want to know if there are any questions in here. Give me one moment. So one of the persons in the chat, they made mention and they were responding to Kitt's comment. I can relate to that, Kitt. My mother did not always acknowledge when she was wrong too, and how that impacts children. And then Kitt was giving feedback to Greg as well. Now, I want to know if there are any other questions. If you have questions, this is a good time to put it in the chat, because we are going to be respectful of the time. But in the meantime, I do want to make sure that we talk about resources. We touched a little bit on NAMI, as well as the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. But Tamu, you are also an author, and I do want to make sure that you both, well, actually, we have a few authors on here, and DiShan with Pure Publishing. And so there's a few representations of written works here. But talk to us a little bit about your book, Tamu, please, and then we'll move around.
Thank you so much, Ericka. So I did release my first book earlier this year in May, and it's called Surviving the Mental Health Tank, because I felt like I was in a tank. So it provides the keys that I learned along the way, some of them. So 5 keys to cultivating emotional well-being for yourself and your loved ones. So I did share my story in there. I touch on losing my brother, and then also raising my daughter, and a portion of the proceeds do go to my foundation to support mental health education programs. So it is available on Amazon, and I can, if Denise is still on, we can put the link in the chat.
Okay, awesome. Definitely want to do that. And I'll make sure that it's in the video description as well. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Kitt, you're welcome. Kitt, talk to us a little bit about your book. I can't hear you, Mama. It's okay. There you go.
in the midst of this, my dog's like, I have to go out. My book's called Balancing Act, Writing Through a Bipolar Life. And it grew from those blog posts I talked about. But that's what it really is. It starts with a sort of a narrative briefly of different times in my life. And then it goes to my posts, which are basically short pieces of nonfiction. Some are poetry, some are just, just short pieces that are organized by content, by bipolar disorder, parenting or caretaking, and mental health advocacy. Like, have certain themes that they're organized by. And that's it. I could put my link in too.
Absolutely. I'm going to make sure that I share and make sure that everyone's aware of it. I actually have the first edition of your book. I look forward to getting Tamu.
It's not as good.
My old adage, these are the things that keep humble, and the list keeps going. Keeps growing. Before we move to Greg and DiShan, I do want to pop back in the chat so we can fill some of these questions. Give me one moment. Ms. Denise, thank you for sharing that link. I'll be more than happy to make sure, again, that gets in the description. So there's a question: how does the platform of mental illness deal with generational curses or strongholds? Many of the things I dealt with was from generational curses, mother being molested by her brother, and etc. DiShan, can you take that one?
So, well, that's a heavy one. That's a heavy question, because we can't discount that does play a factor in our mental health. I think that what we have to do is be more concerned with breaking it than we are understanding it, because I can tell you that I have a lot of generational curses that have tried to attach themselves to me. The moment I could piece it together that that's what it was already really too late for me. I think that what we have to do on these sort of platforms is talk about the solution, because, these problems, we can rehearse them. And I'm very, very big on, what we say, what we speak, because eventually what comes out of our mouth, we believe it in our mind, and then those thoughts begin to manifest in reality. So I would just say, when it comes to generational curses, you can tag it as that. But if it's causing a problem with your mental health, then you need to get help. And some things you cannot pray away. Somebody mentioned earlier about over spiritualizing things. Everything is not spiritual. And that's coming from a pastor. Everything is not spiritual. I don't want people to take away that, oh, I got to go and just pray about this. I need to go and fast. I need to go into deep isolation and, all of these things. That's great for your spiritual health, but for your mind's sake, you need someone who is qualified to speak to you where you are and also where you are wanting to go. You can't undo what has already been done in your past. Those things that have happened to you, unfortunately, we can't take those things away. They've already happened. So I don't want to give a spiritual answer, Ericka, because I'm just really careful to not do that on these type of platforms, because people were doing that to me and it did not work. So I say, go and get some mental health counseling, or go and speak to someone about how to move on from these negative things that have happened in your life. And, and a lot of times, again, it goes back to the simple thing of a hug. Sometimes it's a hug. Sometimes it's, going to counseling more than one time, is really working through that situation and really getting to the bottom of, what your triggers are and what type of things happen to make you fall back. Just like me talking a minute ago about what happened in 2007 triggered me. And I didn't even know that was going to trigger me. You know what I mean? But now that I'm aware of that, I'm not going to necessarily be focused on what happened in 2007. I'm now going to get off of here and figure out, why did that trigger me? Because that's something that I've not dealt with. And so I think the moment you realize something is triggering, whether it's generational or not, go and deal with it somehow. So that way you can have a better future than what your past has offered you.
Excellent. Identify it. We have to identify it. and then we can deal with it. And I'm rejoicing with you in advance for whatever that looks like for you, DiShan. Whatever that looks like for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We're going to take just a few more questions. Question: rates of suicide have decreased since the pandemic, but in communities of color, it's increased at record-setting numbers. There is a trend called September Surge, where pediatric suicides increase after summer months. These two issues are devastating. Can anyone speak to that trend? Greg.
All right, so the communities of color piece, let me address that, because I actually had a couple of articles that I had looked at with regard to where we are right now in the country as it relates to race relations and racism, and how that is playing, how that specific thing is factor is causing an uptick and an uprise in suicide rates, specifically for African Americans, but more so for African American males. And so I think that I think that with where we are sociopolitically right now, and the Pandora's box that's been open for people to be very vocal and verbal about what they were once very quiet about, I think it's caused an uptick in anxiety for us, because we're not just seeing it from a lip service perspective, but we're seeing how those thoughts and ideologies play into every facet that impacts our lives.
I also would add to that, if I may, a collective trauma. When we deal with being on the heels of the pandemic, 2 years later, things have changed. But not only that, you're dealing with isolation. Now, remember, when you're dealing with the socio-political climate that Greg described, when it comes to African American communities, as it relates to what goes on in the house stays on in the house, you have to understand that when everyone is at home, where can I go? Where can I go? Because now mom and dad are stressed, right? Dad, if he's here, people are being laid off. A lot of marriages didn't last. Some children weren't able to get fed because they were only getting that type of connection in school. And so there are a myriad of reasons why it may come into play. And it's interesting because we touched on this before. With these numbers, they are decreasing on a national level,
Right.
but that rise within communities of color is undeniable.
Right.
And so it is definitely something to keep an eye out on. Thank you for bringing up that question. And then lastly, we see the links. So for the sake of time, I do want to give us, we did wonderful on time. We're going to reel it in so we can end on time as promised. I want to hear last thoughts from everyone. I want to start with Kitt. What are your final thoughts and any words of life that you can speak over those who are in attendance and those who will see this at a later time?
I guess what I would like to say is when is that we are enough. That, we don't have to be perfect. We are enough, that we are loved, for all of us. We are loved, we are lovable, and we are capable of loving. And all of us have purpose.
All of us have purpose. All of us have purpose. That's a sweet dismount. It's a sweet dismount. Tamu.
Yes, so the thing that I am thinking of in this moment is around resilience. And I think we've all shared various experiences and challenges. And I want to just acknowledge that we're here through those challenges and experiences, and that gives us evidence that we can make it through things. So hopefully that also gives hope.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. so that we have already outlived our worst days.
Right,
Yeah,
right. And whatever comes up, we can make it through again.
can make it through again. Resilience, I love that. Greg.
I think I'll let my last point be from a parental perspective. And for those that have children and they're currently raising, that may be listening or watching this, to keep your eyes open. A lot of times as adults, and even myself, my wife and I, we have two kids, a 7-year-old and a 17-year-old. 17-year-old is, he's giving us a time. Keep your eyes open just for any little changes that you may see. A lot of times we get into our own thing in our effort to provide a life. We miss a lot of things. And so one thing that my wife and I have just recently implemented is like a weekly family check-in meeting, where not only we not just do logistics for the week, but it's an actual check-in with each other once a week. What's going on? How you doing? If we need stuff in between, we'll do it again. But as long as we have this one set time. So set aside some special set aside time just for you and your family to ensure everyone's mental health.
Thank you. Checking in, asking the questions, open-ended questions, and waiting around long enough to not only hear the answer, but hear to listen, not to respond. Sometimes we want, I think we touched on that a few times, just in terms of embarrassment, somehow your being broken is a reflection on me as a parent. And I don't know what to do about that. So this next round of conversations is like, hey, what's going on? And you tell me, not me giving it back to you in what I think needs to be said. Yeah. And DiShan, last thoughts, or is it life?
So I will say this, as I'm not sure, if anyone is watching that is currently in the struggle, currently battling. I want to just share one of the things that I do when I find myself sinking to that place. And that is, I have to learn how to manage my moments and not turn moments into monuments. Because a lot of times, those of us who struggle, we see that issue as being the biggest thing that ever happened. It becomes a monument in our lives. And so I just want to encourage you to learn how to manage your moments. If I can be the pastor for 3 seconds, there was a Bible story where Elijah was sitting under the tree. He had come from one of his greatest victories, and he's sitting under there begging for God to take his life, And we look at him as being one of the major prophets of the Bible, but he had a moment of weakness. And being weak does not make you wicked. So you don't have any reason to beat yourself up, to feel any less than, to feel as though God loves you any less. I want you to understand that the greatest of these, those who are the strongest, are sometimes often the ones who struggle mentally the most. Elijah was able to pull it together, but one of the things that I always highlight when I'm having this conversation is that even with Elijah being a prophet, a great warrior, someone who did something extremely powerful, the angel came and gave him food first. Food fixes everything.
Okay.
He brought him something to eat first. He didn't even deal with his spirit. He did not deal with his emotions. To listen, what is your physical need? Let's tend to the body. Let's tend to what's going to help you to even be able to comprehend what the treatment is going to be. So I want to encourage people to find out what is that thing that pulls you back into a good place, a happy place. If it's food, whatever is healthy. Let me say it that way. Whatever is healthy, and just again, just learn to manage your moments and know that usually individuals who have a great purpose attached to their life, and those people who are destined for greatness are the ones who have to fight the most. So don't think you're in this by yourself, because you're not.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that. I'm so grateful to everyone who took the time to be with us tonight. All I can say is I'm so glad that you're here. I'm glad that you're still here. It's interesting that people connect your activity in the movement with social media, but there's so much that happens underground, just like the roots of a tree. So do not assume that inactivity on social media is an inactivity in the movement. As you heard that there are a myriad of life experiences here, we only scratch the surface of the surface. And so we'll be having these kinds of conversations more frequently. I got my coattail pulled on that one. Can we at least do once a month, E? I'm going to work on that for you. And remember that you matter. Now, 988 is the lifeline. 988, really important. 800-273-TALK is now 988. If you have a person who dials 800-273-TALK in the States, if they are in crisis, it will still route them to 988. But I want to help get that information out there. In the description, you'll see opportunities and resources, but please remember that you matter, you are not alone, and I release a supernatural portion of peace over you and yours. Have a blessed night. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. Thank you all for your time. I love you to life. Love you to life. Good night, everyone. Good night.